I had always loved Westerns when I was growing up and shared that love with my brother. He had probably shown me the first Westerns I'd seen, and we had watched many, many Westerns as we were growing up. And when I became a director, it was always clear to me that I wanted to make a Western. I love the terrain, I love the country, I love the way it looks, I like the horses, the guns, the costumes, the cowboys. I love the issues that come up in Westerns. I love the heroic figures that cowboys can represent, gunslingers. I love everything about the vitality of that period in our history. The Westerns were very much out of style at that time. They had gone completely out of favor and generally have had a spotty commercial record since, with a few exceptions. But we wanted to remind people of the pleasures that we had had from Westerns growing up. This was about loving all the elements of a Western, all the surfaces. In a way, it's a postmodern Western because it's very much aware of its antecedents and tries to use them in ways that are fun and interesting.
He had done body heat on a very carefully calculated and well-judged small canvas. The Big Chill, rather bigger. He was ready to do something quite large, and he wanted to do a Western. He knew that I shared his enthusiasm, and he very kindly asked me to write it with him, and I wound up being an associate producer as well. Well, Larry had the spirit of the thing in mind, and I agreed completely, the thematic material. He had a few strong images to begin with. For instance, finding Kevin Kline in his long johns and following the motif of his regaining his horse, his hat, and his gun. And also the concept of multiple heroes, of weaving multiple storylines. Those were bits and pieces that Larry already had. We didn't really have the overall shape at the beginning, but as we began to assign values to this or that kind of sequence and began to think about the kinds of people we wanted to be dealing with, it weaved together relatively quickly.
A great many Westerns had been made in Europe in that time period because it was cheaper, but there's not one of them that really looks like America. I scouted in Arizona and New Mexico and Utah, but we were going in the middle of winter. We knew it had to be one of the southern western states, and when I saw New Mexico, I knew that was it, but I fell in love with the light. It was unlike any light I had ever seen. The landscape is spectacular. It's red cliffs. I went back there later and made Wyatt Earp in the same area.
The movie has a kind of glow about it, visually, that's wonderful every time I see it.
The thing I keyed on very much was a fascination that I had the time with the paintings of Georgia O'Keeffe, and I was very intrigued with her color field and her New Mexican landscapes. And as it turned out, one of the key locations that we picked where we first see all four horsemen, the mountains or the hills that you see behind them in Long Lens when we first see them were done up at Ghost Ranch, which was a favorite painting location in northern New Mexico of Georgia O'Keeffe.
I wanted a very large town with wide streets, an expansive horizon that you could look out in every direction. And we found a magnificent spot outside of Santa Fe. And we built the largest western town that had ever been built at one time. You know, old Tucson had been added to over the years. This was a huge set. It's a very popular location, which has now been used probably 100 times in the last 13 years.
We had a camera up every day who took like, a shot a day. So, I'm sure it took a couple of months, let's say, to build it. Probably 3 months, And it snowed a number of times. Sometimes I couldn't go outside. The wind was howling so badly. And we couldn't paint because, the wind was blowing sideways.
We rigged some of the buildings that we had put up, for example, the Midnight Star Saloon, to be usable as sort of rough and ready sound stages. They were not, in fact, soundproof, but out there, except for the rare plane passing over, we just didn't have a sound problem. As long as we cut our own vehicles moving around, it was quiet enough.
The back walls of the saloon were wild, and we could open those up and build smaller sets in a space behind there, and we could hold the extras there. That became a very important space. The fireplace was practical. We had it on all the time because it was cold. So we used that as a saloon and had a number of small sets built behind it that changed.
The use of the camera in terms of camera movement was something Larry and I really wanted to do. We wanted to dolly a lot. The terrain was very difficult. It was very complex, sometimes setting up, long extended dolly shots because, the sands would collapse and things like that. More than any other film I think I've ever done, it was the most labor-intensive film. The amount of work by the crew to go into getting a very simple shot was mind-boggling. I've never been through anything like it. It was very much like you imagine John Ford Westerns or the Howard Hawks Westerns from the 40s and 50s. You see production stills of the arcs and everything on these huge rubber-tired dollies. And, we found out we ended up doing the same thing. Our Wranglers, a lot of them had tremendous kind of filmography and history that sit around, between setups telling stories about Hawks and Ford and Raoul Walsh. And it was really fascinating.
We had something called the Terraflight, which was essentially a camera on an arm with a kind of gyroscope. Whether you have this Terraflight or just a regular camera truck, you need some relatively smooth road that runs parallel to where your people are riding. And there can be no sign of any road anywhere in the area. So you have to actually make roads where there are none based on what you want to see in the foreground and the background. And so it takes enormous careful planning. You can't just go out there and get some running shots of people, because the only way you could easily do it would be along a highway somewhere, and very rarely is there a place that you want to ride and where there aren't fences and telephone poles.
We tried to grade a road, kind of a dirt path over the top of this hill, but it had rained not too many days earlier than that, and the ground was still super saturated and wet, and it was very uneven going. But the Terraflight did allow us to get a couple of very dramatic shots, starting close on the horses, and then kind of booming up on the crane and panning over, catching the riders in a line of four stretched across the screen. So, it was a really rather heroic shot.
Well, we did shoot right through the winter. We began just after Thanksgiving and shot until the middle of March. We were in New Mexico in part looking for milder weather than we might have found farther north.
It's been challenging, cold. It's made everyone maybe a little tougher than they are. And I think in that way, the elements have worked to our advantage, because there is a hard feeling through which the warmth of certain situations or characters comes through, but it has to be hard. It's hard-earned when it does, because the environment has not been terribly sympathetic to our needs, and we've had to battle them at times. But I find that invigorating. It adds an edge to things sometimes.
As cold as it's been, as much mud as I tramped through, just allowed me to experience some things I hadn't thought I'd ever experience as an actor and part as a human being,
Our job, should we choose to accept it, is to remain standing during the entire scene.
He's rotated left way.
He's not a trooper.
Go!
We had a large group of the actors in the rehearsals, not just the four leads. It was also, Brian Dennehy and Linda Hunt and Rosanna. And it was a very interesting period, as rehearsal periods always are.
Larry does a great job in the rehearsal period, and I was privileged to be there. Usually, the actual text does not change much. What happens is that the actors find the three-dimensionality behind the line, and I never cease to be amazed at how they can take a line that you wrote one way and say those words and have it mean what you need it to mean for the plot, and at the same time turn it so that there are three other meanings, three other emotions involved. And that's really what went on in the rehearsal period. There was a lot of bonding between the four protagonists. It helped a lot that they got to know each other, both in rehearsal and during a period of training we had for them where they spruced up their writing skills and their shooting skills, and they were all working together. It helped, I think, when we came to shoot to make them into a convincing team.
In rehearsals, Larry spent a lot of time talking about Silverado really being about family and how people find that for themselves, how they arrange that. a support system in their lives. It's a town where people come and have to face certain things in themselves and resolve certain problems in their lives. Everyone finds something or doesn't find something in Silverado. It's one or the other.
Arvo Ojala was the gun advisor and quick draw expert. He had been famous since I had been, an 8-year-old. I used to see him on television. He had trained James Arness for Gunsmoke and all the cowboy series that I grew up with. He was quite an elderly man by this point, but still completely active and very good. And he trained all of the lead in gun handling.
They said, now this is Arvo Ojala. He'll be teaching you fast draw. He's one of the greatest fast draw teachers in the world. And Arvo was a great teacher, but I'm going, what is this Finnish guy doing in the Old West? Well, he taught Paul Newman in the left-handed gun, and he taught Jack Palance. And I remember one day, he was talking about speed. And he said, go for your gun, and I will go for my gun, and I'll fire off 2 rounds at you before you even get your gun out of your holster. I went, oh, come now. I don't think I'm quite that slow. And we squared off, and sure enough, before my hand got to the holster, he had killed me twice.
There had to be the challenge of violence for the heroes. That's the milieu in which the Western hero expresses himself and becomes himself. The fact that he has responsibility for his actions down to life and death issues. The fact that he carries a gun at his hip as a samurai wears a sword at his waist is the sign and symbol of that complete responsibility.
You can tell that it hurts when someone's hit. You can tell that they've been punctured when they're shot. But there's no slow motion luxuriating in the blood spurting. And we know in reality how horrible those things can be. We see it on the news every night. But they're they're not glamorized. And I don't believe they should be.
On days when we were riding the horses, they had to drag us off those horses at the end of the day. We loved it, especially Scott Glenn and I. We'd always want to run the horses, and they'd say, hey, you got to rest the horse, you got to rest the horse. We'd always want to just sort of gallop off and jump over things, and we loved our horses.
I started this movie, I barely knew which side of a horse to get on. Now I could ride horses. And I don't say that with too much ego, but I can ride. Show me a horse and I'll ride him.
We had to learn for that one shot where we're riding 4 in tandem. It's a very difficult thing to do, to get it just right, because some of the horses don't like the other horses and they start kicking them. And anyway, we had to train them to do that. And so we rehearsed that every day, and how to get the horse to stop and hit its mark exactly.
Naturally, there were some smoke and mirrors kinds of effects we had to create, since the actors fire blanks. And the timing of breaking the windows in the McKendrick Ranch, for example, when Jake, Kevin Costner, rides across the porch, breaks those windows, turned out to be better to have a special effects man with an air gun break those windows than to have used explosive squibs on the glass. And I think the effect is great.
There's a scene where Kevin Costner is walking beside the house and his nephew tries to jump on his horse the way that the Costner character, Jake, we've already seen, can jump on his horse when they're escaping from jail. Kevin, right before the scene started, said, I'm going to put my hat on the horse. And it was totally goofy and very much in character for Jake. Costner was full of ideas like that. This was at a time when Kevin was just beginning to emerge as a star. This movie really made him the star he was. But he had it all in him. And he was full of ideas that just would highlight or flavor the character, make him a little bit funnier, a little bit goofier, a little more daring, a little more exciting. And everyone contributed things like that. That's what you expect. When you work with good actors, you expect them constantly to be suggesting things. And what you're hoping is that those you accept work out, and the ones you reject, they don't sulk about it. It's a great pleasure to get to stage your own showdown. In fact, of the whole complicated final act of Silverado, my favorite part is both Costner riding into town and shooting down the 2 guys at once, and Kline walking through the town and facing Dennehy finally. Those images are as beautiful as anything in the movie.
here's Kevin representing the forces of civilization, of order, this white church behind him. And on the reverse, Brian Dennehy, and behind him is nothing. The end of the town opening onto just the absolute void of the open desert.
Kline and Dennehy are both excellent in the scene. And the shots, it was done in Super 35, so that we could hold focus both on the very close gun that we see in the foreground and on the opponent down the street. And there's two shots, matching shots from each guy's holster. It's just pure fun to be able to finally stage something that you think is classic stuff.
When you have a group of people who are working together in as much harmony as we were and enjoying themselves as much as we were, despite the cold, it creeps into every frame of the picture. And it became a kind of extension of what Larry and I had set out to do in the script, where two brothers writing a movie that features prominently two brothers and that frequently deals with issues of loyalty and friendship and family, found a sort of parallel situation during the production where the whole cast and crew became a kind of family. That's a cliche, I know, but it was true.
Silverado was such a difficult and long shoot. We shot for 96 days in the middle of winter. And if it hadn't been for the support of my family, it would have been impossible. Both boys are in the film. My littler one looks at Kevin Kline as he's standing in his underwear about to shoot down the guy who's trying to kill him in the first town. And my older son, Jake, who's already directed his first film now, plays the little boy who comes and gets John Cleese when the gallows are burning in the town of Turley. My wife appears in the scene where Danny Glover is refused lodgings in a bar.
In the end, the dynamism of the story dictated that some of it go. It came down from about 2 hours and 50 minutes at the first assembly to 2:12 at release.
The hat was on the floor, and I did this thing where I kicked it, and it flipped over once, and I caught it and just sort of, well, it almost landed on my head. And Larry cut it out of the film. I go, Larry, that's so cool. Yeah, it took too long, though. Or it seemed like a circus stunt.
Bruce Broughton created an amazing score for the movie, including a theme which is played constantly at basketball games, football games, and has been for the last 13 years. It's a terrific theme from Silverado.
The idea of a sequel arose about 5 years after the original film, and so it was a little easier to project where they might be. Now it would be more of a question. I think a few of them might be dead by now with the lives they led.
We developed a script for a sequel, but I got to tell you that I never had my heart in it. I'm not, despite having written Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, I'm not world's greatest believer in sequels. I think that you ought to just try to make one good movie and move on.